Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org. Hi, this is Bill Kenower of Author Magazine, and today I'm at the Pacific Northwest Writers Conference with the wonderful author, Stephen James. Stephen, welcome to Author.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
One question I like to start with, I think is particularly apropos to you, based on your teaching, from what I understand of your teaching, is I'd like to know when you first recognized that story, just the concept of story, mattered to you as a person.
You know, when I was a kid, my uncle would always, whenever we would see them for Christmas, New Year's, whatever, he would always like take the kids into a corner of the room, even if we only saw them for 10 minutes a year. And he'd say, I'm going to tell you a story, right? And so we'd be sitting in the corner of the room and he'd get this look in his eye. And like, if you've ever had someone tell you stories, you know the look, right? Yep. And so all of a sudden we were no longer in the living room, we were on the Caribbean, or we were up in Alaska staring down a grizzly bear, or on another planet. And so I had this, from an early age, just this great example of storytelling. And eventually I started reading, and then when I was in college, I heard about sort of this movement, the storytelling movement that was happening, like oral storytelling, right? Yeah, and so I started to go to schools and to tell stories. I went to this school and I was like, I'm a storyteller. And they're like, oh really? I was like, yeah, bring all the kids in the gym and I'll tell stories.
How old were you?
I was like 19 or something like that.
So, brave guy.
Yeah, and I was like, bring all the kids in the gym and I'll tell stories for like, half an hour or whatever. And he's like, well, how much do you charge? And I was like, well, my friends get like $7 an hour at McDonald's or whatever. This is a half an hour. I was like, $25. And he's like, okay. I was like, amazing. So anyway, they bring in 400 kids, and I did like
400?
Oh, that whole school, right? And then so I did like a half-hour show of storytelling, and then afterwards, he's giving me $25. He's like, usually we pay people a little bit more for this. I was like, well, thanks for telling me. So there was this time, in my life where I was attracted to story, but then there was this time where I finally sort of said, this is what my life is about, is telling stories. Whether it's written stories or stories told, it's really become, I'd say, a central part, of my life.
Become your life.
Yeah, over the last 30 years.
Well, I think it's great that that's the way you were introduced to it. I think, although I've been writing sort of all my life, I believe I was introduced to storytelling by sitting around with my family and telling stories. That oral, and I don't hear a lot of writers, because some of them are so shy, make that connection between being told a story. But I think that's where I learned how to make it fast, how to make it engaging, because you don't have a lot of time.
With my kids, when they were younger, we'd all get together on the bed at bedtime or whatever, and I would say, all right, I'm going to tell you a story, and I would always continue the story like from the night before. So I'd say, as you remember, and I would remind them of what happened, and then at the end, I would get to an exciting spot, and I would say, I'll tell you more tomorrow. And they'd be like, no, tell us more tonight. I said, no, tomorrow. So we literally did this for a decade, probably 300 nights a year.
The same story?
Well, it continued. It grew. It was this fantastical story, kind of like Narnia, Lord of the Rings, with animals that talked and wizards and dragons and everything like that. And so at the time I was traveling and speaking quite a bit. And so we got a cell phone. This is back in the day. I mean, not for me to do business, but so that at night I could call and do a bedtime story.
Wow.
So like from wherever I was in the world, I would like call at like 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, right? And I would like, as you remember, and then we would review from, then I would say, I'll tell you when. They say no. And there were a few times where I would say, and they all lived happily ever after. My kids would be like, no, you didn't. I was like, yeah, no,
what a good lesson.
It's done. They said, no, they didn't. I said, come on, they lived it. And they said, no, something went wrong. And that is at the heart of any great story,
That's right?
And we want the story to go on. And so it was neat that my kids, I've never written any of those stories, but I mean, I just made them up on the spot, thousands
Did you plan
of stories.
it during the day?
No,
okay.
no. I just do it. And so it's neat that my kids grew up in this really multi-storied world, right? With all these characters and creatures, and it just became a big part and fabric of their childhood. And I think that's, You were talking about oral stories with your family. I mean, what a great heritage or legacy to be able to leave, with people that imagination.
I'm firmly convinced that story, and I have a broad definition of it in my mind, is the only way human beings can communicate. It's the only way we can frame our experience, because story is a limited interpretation of what happened. You can't tell everything. You have to make some choices.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I think we were talking about this the other day, but we both share an interest in memoir, personal stories.
Yeah.
And when I was getting my master's degree in storytelling back in the late 90s, I was doing research on this whole idea of what is a story, right? And leading researchers in the world at the time, the leading AI researchers, were theorizing and saying the only way to make machines ever think like people is to teach them not to think in algorithms, but to think in stories.
Yeah.
And so if you look at sort of strong AI or whatever, the movement and stuff, smart learning or whatever it is, this is the movement. Is ever since then, it's been this movement away from algorithms toward trying to emulate the way we frame and understand the world, which is through stories.
And you said something interesting, and this is one of the challenges, I think, for computers to ever think like humans.
Yeah.
And I think you hinted at it when your children said, no, something bad happens.
Yeah.
And this is what all writers have to deal with. We traffic in trouble.
Yeah.
But do we want trouble in our lives? No, we want our lives to be trouble-free, we say. And yet, where is life? Where is the story without trouble?
Yeah. Yeah, when I was teaching yesterday, I said to people, I was like, now some of you look really nice. And I can tell that you love your characters and you don't want them to suffer. But I was like, that's the opposite of what your readers want. You have to. Now, when we read a book, the people we care about the most, we want to suffer the most, which is bizarre, but we want them to get out of it in the end. We want them to be rescued or solve the solution problem and so on. But yeah, and it's because I think, I don't know exactly, but we understand life through story, and story, at the heart of story is tension, and at the heart of tension is unmet desire. So really we don't know what a story is about until we know what the character wants. And it's the pursuit of desire really that lies at the heart of every story, right? So I think that when we see people facing setbacks and obstacles and making choices, we understand through that the world. Sometimes I tell people that stories help us to believe, but believe the things we already know, which sounds kind of weird.
No, absolutely. So here's one of my definitions of a story. A deep breath, hold your breath, breathe again. So you're breathing, you hold your breath, everything's not okay. Everything's okay. It's remembering that everything is returning to normal, but the holding the breath reminds you why breathing is so nice.
Yeah, it's just this, we know certain things, right? Like breathing, whatever we have to do, but like certain things like life is not all about what we own.
Right.
But it's about the relationships we have. I mean, we know this on a certain level, but we forget it, right?
Yes, we do.
And then or that life is short. I mean, we know that intellectually that we could die at any moment, but we don't really believe it. But then when a story comes, we suddenly do. I remember I was watching a movie, I don't know, maybe it was Braveheart, I can't really remember. There's a big battle scene, whatever movie it was. And as I was watching this battle scene, I suddenly realized, one day I'm going to die. Now, obviously, I knew I was going to die, right?
No, but then you saw it.
Right, but then I was just like, wow, life is short like this. And so this is what stories do. I think they give us this glimpse into the universal experience of what it is, human nature and what it is to be human, to be desiring and to be striving and learning and growing.
I have one more question for you, Stephen. This has been a fascinating conversation, but one more question, which is, I'd like you to finish this sentence. If writing has taught me anything, it's taught me what?
How to use a spell checker.
Oh, come on! You'd have learned that.
All right.
What has it taught you? Writing is your life, isn't it?
It has taught me actually that there's often more meaning in a moment than I'm aware of. Because as I explore my life, whether I'm writing fiction or non, very often when I look back through the lens of time, I see a moment that I didn't realize had such significance. And so I think writing for me opens my eyes to be able to embrace those moments and grab hold of them.